Welcome to Warrior, the Art of War for Life, a podcast for those who want to win. Leadership lessons, motivational mindsets, empowering principles, success strategies, and transformational tactics from Sun Tzu, the master of victory. I'm your guide on the side, David Boyd, award-winning educator, transformational speaker, and certified life coach. It's time to start winning at life. Hey, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm your guide on the side, David Boyd, and this is the Art of War for Logging. I'm wearing my flannels today. So this is the Warrior Mindset Unplugged, our third installment. And I am so excited to have one of my favorite cadets, Jessica Fisher, class of 2025, here with me today. And she's going to share her story with you guys and really get into what this looks like. The warrior mindset. You've overcome some challenges in your life and you've done some amazing things. And you're still young. You're just getting started. But I wanted to bring you on, next to a lot of these other people to really help you guys realize that you don't have to be a brigadier general and you don't have to be an All-American and you don't have to be an international keynote speaker to make a difference. You can make a difference where you are right now with whatever you've got, because there's always somebody around, there's always some cause around that you can get involved with. And so, Jess, you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Hello, I'm Jessica Fisher. I'm a cadet here at the Air Force Academy. I'm cadet third class, but to everyone else, I'm just a sophomore in college. And I think, at the end of the day, I'm just a normal college student like everyone else. And I think, first of all, I didn't get to say this when he said class of 2025, but I'd like to say psycho because that's our class exemplar here at the academy. And I think that's significant just because that's someone here who represents a warrior mindset and is worth learning about. And when we're upperclassmen, we teach our freshmen about this individual and about the teachings they have. So I'll say it again, psycho. But yeah, as Bo Laoshi, as I know him.
That's my Chinese name, Bo Laoshi.
as Bo Laoshi introduced me, I grew up with an interesting background, a lot different than most people that I know, if not all people I know. Obviously, it sounds cliche to say, but I'm unique from everyone else, and I think that I like to use my uniqueness as a sort of strength point for me, and it's helped me find a lot of my motivation here at the academy. So just to dive into it, one of the things that I've done here is I've raised origami and raised funds for it and been able to buy boats for fishermen in rural parts of the Philippines. I'm a blackbelt in Tae Kwon Do, and I think that's just cool because I was taught how to defend myself, and it's not necessarily about being offensive but about defending and learning about the tenets of Tae Kwon Do, which I still remember to this day, even though I learned it at least 10, 11 years ago. And then the most foundational part about me that really boils down to my core, everything that I do here with that sort of mindset, is when I was young, I was on a learning plan just because I had a slight learning disability that I've since overcome. And I think that differs a lot from especially my classmates here at the academy who have come from backgrounds where they've excelled in something throughout their whole life. Whereas for me, I had to teach myself how to learn and how to overcome challenges. And I think that has helped me with my perspective here as a leader at the academy and helped me gain a perspective on how I want to influence people as an officer in the Air Force, as well as after I get out of the Air Force.
Awesome. Thank you. And you have an amazing story. You have a unique background, and really you kind of brought this out to everybody. You've embraced your uniqueness, right? Instead of trying to just fit in and be like everybody else, you said, no, I'm gonna embrace my uniqueness, and that is something that's really important, especially at your age, even younger, growing up all through those awkward middle school years and those high school years. There's so much peer pressure to fit in and not rock the boat. So what was it like for you growing up? Where did you grow up? What was that like? Your mom was an immigrant, right? What was that like for you, and what did you learn? Where did you get that fighting spirit?
So I'll start where I grew up. I lived my whole life in one singular house in Metro Denver, which, for perspective, here at the Air Force Academy, it's a long 45-minute drive away. So I've lived there my whole life, and I think that's something, I don't see it as something where it's a weak point. I think I have a great home with a great family, and I'm glad to have lived there my whole life. And my mom is an immigrant from the Philippines, so that combination of living in a suburban area with a parent who's an immigrant. My dad was raised in America, but in a predominantly white community that's like upper middle class. Definitely, I grew up there my whole life, so coming and seeing the differences between how people lived was something that was a lot, really different for me. And I think it was super beneficial, because that's influenced a lot of where my thinking has come from, along with the fact of that I did have struggles as a kid. So going to kindergarten, I'll share this story. In first grade, I remember there was a teacher, and she was reading books to the rest of the class. I, however, was still not to the same level that my classmates were. So she kind of just left me out of the book reading conversation, and didn't really provide me any materials at all to read or learn from. And that's one thing that really struck to me, because I wasn't provided the materials that I needed to at least try to succeed. And I think, looking back on it, I remember that experience uniquely, just because I think that's the time when I really decided that I wanted to at least try to start making a difference in my own education, and that it was up to my own resolve and people who actually cared about my education that I had to make those connections with, in addition to my parents, in order to substantiate my learning to get to the level that my classmates were. Your heart beats and you're on this earth, and there's sometimes that your heart beats in unison with the earth and it sings with it. So when you really listen to your heart, you're able to get understanding of what you need and how you're able to succeed.
I appreciate you bringing that up. I really like that. In a previous episode, we discussed kind of 4 tactics to shift the balance of power, to kind of tip the scales of life in our favor. And the very first thing is to listen to your heart. And so at a young age, you realized that you had to take charge of your education, that no one was going to help you, right or wrong, right? Good, bad, or ugly. At a young age, in first grade already, you had made that connection. If I want to learn to read, if I want to, get the education that I need, I've got to take charge of my own education, and I got to take ownership over my life, which is really empowering, right? And it's so important. Like, we don't get to control the circumstances of our lives, and we don't get to control a lot of times what kind of the river of life brings us, right? I talk about life as this river. We don't get to control, I'd say very rarely, what the river of life brings us, but we have our own little raft, and we always get to control how we're going to navigate those currents of challenge. And we don't have to let, the currents of challenge kind of dash our hopes and dreams on the rocks of reality, right? Oh, this is just all I've got. This is what I'm doomed or destined for. So I really admire that at a young age you had the courage and you had the awareness to recognize that, and then the courage to act on it. And not just for you, but already at that age you're starting to think about how you can help other people. Mm-hmm. That's really impressive.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you. One thing that I like to make sure that with my learning was that it's a team effort, and I definitely couldn't have done it especially with my mom or my second grade teacher. She was super influential to me because she made sure she went out of the way to make sure that my needs were being cared for, and my mom made sure that I was still learning. And I think the difference was that she provided the materials, but she couldn't be there all the time to make sure I did it. It was the effort of all of them that made me motivated to teach myself how to learn, and to not only use the materials that they provided me, but to go beyond that. And it stood out to me because in first grade, my reading comprehension was relatively low, I would say, compared to most people. And by the time I got to fourth grade, I was in advanced math, reading multiple books per week. And I think I attribute that to the two individuals who I mentioned earlier, but also to my drive to just not be in the same situation that I was, where I just kind of sat there and wasn't being read with the rest of the classmates, where I kind of I was just not treated like someone. I was treated not as an individual who deserved the same education just because I had something out of my control that I couldn't fix about my background of an education. And I think that's what the motivation was. And so it's definitely worth mentioning that a team and having a strong base of individuals is super important in being able to overcome any sort of situation, that regardless of what the situation is, that it's super important to have that team. And if it's just one person, that's two people is stronger than one person, and they can provide insights that you wouldn't know or resources that you wouldn't have. And that's something that's super important to note.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that Brigadier General Paul Parag had mentioned in one of the earlier episodes of the Warrior Mindset Unplugged, the importance of teamwork. And interestingly enough, as we talked about kind of listening to your heart, that second level of listening, after we've listened to our heart, we know what we want, is to go find people who have our best interests in mind, who love us unconditionally, who support us, who encourage us, and then listen to what they have to say instead of what the naysayers are screaming at us. And so I'm really glad that you found that your mom was so supportive, and your second grade teacher. So you mentioned your second grade teacher. Do you remember her name?
Of course I remember.
You want to give her a shout out on the podcast?
Mrs. Shields was my second grade teacher, and if she somehow sees this, I want her to know that her and what she taught me, and just the general effort that she gave me meant so much to me. And I don't remember most of my teachers from way back then's name, but I can still remember Miss Shields' name because that's how important and transformational she was to me. And I had her at my middle school graduation, and I just think that I was super fortunate to have good teacher like her to really support me through my educational journey.
So Miss Shields, wherever you are, and to educators everywhere who feel like you're not making a difference, good educators who love your students and who sacrifice and go the extra mile, who reach out to maybe some of those students who, for whatever reason, either don't feel like they fit in or on the outside. Thank you for everything that you do. As one fellow educator to another, we don't know the impact that we have on a lot of our students, sometimes until much later and sometimes never. But you guys have an amazing and important role to play. So thank you, Ms. Shields, for what you've done for Jessica Fisher. She's going to go on to do amazing things. She's already done amazing things, and you were a really important part of that. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I also like to give a shout out to Bao Laosher, because he was my first semester Chinese teacher at the academy, and he always ended class with saying "Hao Jila," which means like "you're awesome." And I think regardless of how someone's day was going, that always gave at least someone a little bit of joy in their life, and always made the class just a little bit more hyper, especially being freshmen where we have a lot of stresses going on. So Bo, we all appreciate you, and I'm here like having a talk with you. So
yep. Well,
the influence that you've had on my life has been tremendous as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And yeah, I always end class by reminding them, because I feel like, especially at the academy, but even elsewhere, there's so many forces that are trying to grind you down and break us. And as someone who struggled with depression throughout my life, who felt worthless at times, I never wanted any of my students to feel that. I never wanted you to feel that in the midst of your hardship and your struggle and your trials. I always wanted you to feel like there's just no end to how good you are. And that goes to everybody out here. Everybody is unique. Everybody has great gifts to give the world and a profound purpose on this planet. And so, whoever is out there that needs to hear it today, you are awesome, you are amazing, and you are absolutely essential in this world. Or, as I would end in every Chinese class, Ni Hao Jila. And that was always something something I continue to do, to not let you guys forget and not focus on the mistakes. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's talk about Tae Kwon Do. So you get into Taekwondo. You're a black belt in Taekwondo. What was the motivation behind that, and what did you learn about the warrior mindset? Right. You fight for your education. Were some of those skills, they transfer back and forth between Taekwondo education to Taekwondo? What was that like for you? What was the greatest thing you learned?
I think, the reason why I get into Taekwondo was because I always just enjoyed like being able to, I like kicking things. And not in an aggressive way, just like I'm very like legs, like kicking things sort of person. So I always liked that, and I think I wanted to do something. Like I wanted to do a sport, and Taekwondo was a great outlet. Like it was offered at my recreation center by my house, and so that was just like initial foot in the doorway for me to get it. And I wasn't sure if I would initially like it, because it was like fighting, and I'm not like a super like, oh, I want to like go out and fight someone person. And that was like my initial interpretation. You went there and you fought people. But I learned that Taekwondo isn't just about fighting people. It's about learning to have like self-discipline and being able to control yourself and learn about like other people and about like the history of Taekwondo, or why we do certain movements in Taekwondo. Usually in Taekwondo, for context, there's two portions. There's a sparring portion and there's a poomsae portion. And sparring portion is exactly what it sounds like. That's where two people fight and there's a winner. In poomsae, it's a specific set of forms or movements that is standardized across all of the World Taekwondo Federation, which is what appears, that's like the style that appears in the Olympics. And for that, you have to take the time to learn it, and it takes a lot of discipline. And there's a winner obviously for everything, but in order to be able to become a winner, like there's a lot of learning that becomes behind it. And there are people who've dedicated like their whole lives to learning about how to be better in like the specific like discipline that they're in. And I think in my Taekwondo we did both sparring and we did Poomsae, and at the time I definitely was more of like a sparring person. I think I still do lean slightly sparring just because like I know all of the Poomsae very well, but I also haven't been doing the Poomsae for as long as I have been doing the fighting. And I think I liked the fighting just because it always provided something, like a little bit of energy. And when you're sparring, it doesn't matter like, you know, person's background or how tall, how short they are. It's just about, you know, like putting in the heart to win, even especially when you're tired. And I always enjoyed that. And I remember in my black belt class fighting a whole sorts of people, and that was super hard because like my black belt exam took me, like my class took me at least 6 to 8 months, and the exam was a couple hours where I broke boards and did forms. I did everything that like someone would do in Taekwondo, but it really gave me an appreciation for like the effort that I had put in for like the years prior, where in Taekwondo it's super easy to get started. Like anyone can be a white belt, but going to practices and like doing the belt testing and then being even denied belts when you feel like you deserve it, but the master doesn't think that you do because you don't meet the certain requirements, like that's humbling. And that's where you start to see the people dropping out, where it goes from there being a large cohort of white belts to a selective few of black belts that have at least learned and are more disciplined than like your average set of fighters, where they know that they had to at least work for like the belt they have, because no one gets their black belt in a year. No one even gets it in 2 years. I know most people I know, it took them at least 4 to 5 years to get their black belt. And that's a long time for like anyone. That's how much time you spend in college. At least for a 4-year university that where I'm going. And so dedicating yourself to a slow process where you can't buy your way through, you know, you can't buy yourself a Taekwondo education. You can't buy yourself a Taekwondo belt. You have to actually go through the belt. That's what I think was super beneficial. And then tying it into education, like you can't buy yourself. You can obviously buy yourself materials and the resources that you need, but at the end of the day, only you and like the effort that you put in to the education is what's gonna make like a difference. Like you can show up and you can take an exam, but where the difference is that you can't not, like the analogy, you can't just do can't do work on a project and expect to get an A, especially if it's an individual project. You can't just show up and wing it, because there at least is some sort of preparation that goes on. And if you really wanted to, in this case, like be a black belt in education, you would have to put effort into it. So I think that's kind of like how I tied into education, was that it takes like a self-discipline and like a concerted effort in what you're doing in order to like become a black belt or to get an undergraduate degree.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of things that I wanted to follow up with you. So, were you ever denied a belt?
I'm sure I was. There's so many belts in Taekwondo that I am 99% sure I've been denied a belt. And the fact that I don't remember it shows you how insignificant I was, because I learned from it, and I just, obviously I tested again later, and got the belt, and then, because that's how you become a black belt. So, but I'm sure I got denied a belt, because most people, if they genuinely try, like you're not just automatically good. You have to at least try and learn. Yeah, and I mentioned this a few weeks ago in the podcast that
There's this great quote by Marie Forleo, which basically says you got to get up off your butt and you got to be willing to go out there and suck in the beginning, and still, even as you're sucking, believe that you're going to get better in order to get there. And so, was it hard for you in the beginning? Like, were you just getting your tail kicked in sparring sessions, and so then how did you overcome that?
I think from what I remember, given that this was at least 11 years ago, was that I wasn't very good at Tae Kwon Do at the beginning. I was just your average Joe. But as I got better, I got significantly better at sparring. And by the time I was, like the upper belts, like testing to be in the black belt class, I was much, much better. My mom, loves to remind me about the fact that she has seen me beat up guys before and I made them cry. And I always think that funny because I genuinely don't remember this, but I'm also just like in that mindset that like there's no hard feelings. We're just fighting and then we're becoming better. And the one thing about Tae Kwon Do is that like you can never tell how good of a fighter someone is just by looking at them. And so I've heard this about many other sports too, but especially for the combat sports, it's humbling because you can't tell like how good someone is by just taking a glance at them, because it's hard to know how much effort they put in like like in the dojo. And so I think like me like having my experiences when I was fighting like black belt level, I mean, yeah, sure I did, give some bruises, maybe a couple broken bones here and there, but I think like me and the person I would be fighting against, like we all got something out of it, and we both got our black belt at the end of the day. And I just think it's a good experience to be able to, fight someone of like even the opposite gender, and there not to be any stigmas like, oh, you're fighting a girl sort of thing. I think like the person I was fighting against, like there was just an understanding that like we're both in the same black belt class and we're just gonna do our best.
Mm-hmm. And did you ever feel like quitting?
I don't remember ever feeling like I wanted to quit in Taekwondo. I think I genuinely enjoyed being in Taekwondo, and I enjoyed it so much that once I got my black belt, my school had offered something called the Storm Team for some black belts, and that's where like the black belts go out and they teach like the lower level belts how to do Taekwondo. And I think I joined the Storm Team, and I genuinely enjoyed like being able to teach like the young people, or being able to, even before that, like leading some of the classes, because I like Taekwondo, and I think it was a good release of energy and like a good like portion of my time spent doing something that like wasn't like my cup of tea. Was not doing volleyball. I'm sure if I played volleyball for that fact right now, the ball would go backwards if I hit it. For me, I did Taekwondo, I was good at Taekwondo, and I think I was perfectly satisfied with that.
So you found your strengths, you stuck with it, even when those numbers from the white belt classes through the middle intermediate ranks were dwindling, you stayed with it. And you talked about discipline. Discipline is one of Sun Tzu's 5 essential attributes for leaders, specifically for generals. And the Chinese character for discipline is yen, which can mean strict and severe, serious, but it can also mean respect. And in particular, I always think of it as a form of self-respect. The character is this kind of overhang, and I'll put it in the show notes for y'all out there. I've talked about it before. And on top of this kind of cliff, there's a couple of mouths, and I always think of it as like the naysayers up at the top peering down saying, you're not going to make it. You may as well just give up now. There's no hope. So discipline is the determination. It's the daring the boldness to keep climbing, even when there's people at the top saying you're not going to make it, to climb and claw your way up. And that's the Chinese character for discipline, and I've seen a lot of that in you. And so, what made you want to come to the academy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when I was applying for colleges, like, I had a specific, like, route plan in mind, and it's not necessarily like plan of study or like what college I wanted to go to. It was like my first priority was, you know, going to a place where I can make like a difference and where I can have the opportunity to do something super duper cool and be able to, you know, influence people like around me. And the Air Force Academy is a great place to like do that through the 4-class system model, where like starting my year, like I have the opportunity to lead like tons of individuals. For example, like I led around like 50 to 55 freshmen last semester, and in addition to who I was leading within my squadron. And I think that was like, that is a representative exactly of what I wanted like from my education. And I think I had applied to numerous different colleges, but when it came down to it, like when I considered my options, that the Air Force Academy was like the best option for me to get exactly what I wanted out of like my education and to be able to lead others. Like, yes, of course it would be hard. Every college is hard, and Air Force has its own unique set of challenges, but accepting those challenges and being willing to, like, you know, engage in the dance was something that like kind of struck with me, just because the same reasons why I came here is why I've chosen to stay. Because when, you know, you're going through basic training and your cadre asks you, why did you come to USAFA? And then I say, because I wanted to make an impact on people's lives and to influence the airmen and the people under me. That's when I say that, like, that has stuck with me for at least for where I am now, and will stay with me until when I'm a firstie, through when I graduate, when I'm a lieutenant, a captain, or wherever where I may end up, is remembering that, like, as long as I'm doing something to affect someone's life positively and that they learn something, then, like, I'm satisfied with what I'm doing.
And I'm really glad you brought up the why, because it's so important, right? That is the most important of Swinza's 5 strategic success factors, which I fumble over that all the time. But it's the most important, because our why is our way forward, right? When the cadre are screaming at you, why did you come here? What do you think you're doing? Having that why in your mind is, you know, that's what helps us get through those hard times. Right? And so I'm glad that you brought that up, and I'm glad that you found your why. A lot of people struggle for a long time to find their why. Right? I certainly struggled for a long time to find my why. I didn't have a why when I was your age. I maybe had bits and pieces of a why here and there sometimes, but I didn't have this overarching idea. And I think it's amazing that you found it and that you live from that place, and that now you're setting the example for your peers, for everybody else. Like, you don't have to be a certain age to find your why, right? And when you do, it makes all the difference in the world. I was actually listening to a podcast this morning on my way into work where they interviewed Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he talked about how from a very early age in Austria, he knew that he wanted to become a professional bodybuilder, he wanted to become Mr. Universe, and he wanted to become a movie star, and then he wanted to become the governor of California. And so from a very young age, he had those goals in mind, and he knew why. And so that became the why behind everything that he did, and he accomplished all of his goals. It got so simple for him when he had that why. And so that's really important, right? When we have a clear version of our why, all of our priorities kind of they fall into place, or they fall out of our lives, the things that aren't as important. So you have a really interesting hobby, which is folding origami that you mentioned. But you don't just fold simple origami. You fold some really complicated things, and you brought a piece. You wanna bring it over here and show it. So this is a star, and I don't know how well it's going to show up here, but this is insanely intricate. How many pieces of paper is this made out of?
That is exactly 100 pieces.
100 pieces of paper folded. And how long did this take you to do?
Probably around 2 to 2.5 hours, including folding, cutting time, all inclusive.
Yeah. So 2 to 2.5 hours, and I mean this is amazing. It really is exquisite. I will put a really good picture of this on the show notes because the video is not going to do it justice. And for those of you listening to the audio, you're going to have no clue. This segment's not going to make any sense at all. So watch the video version or go to the blog version and see the photo. But this is exquisite.
Thank you.
So when did you start folding origami? Tell us about that.
I think I started folding origami back in 2nd grade, and this was because I actually, coincidentally enough, was going to like a Sunday school Chinese, and one of the things that they offered there was origami. And by no means am I an artistic person. At least I think like my stick figures are not up to par at all. But this is like my substitute is origami. And so I got into it because I thought it was super cool, like making animals, making like little pieces of art that like I could take back and put in my room and then reference later on was like super cool to me. And I think like making origami just for yourself is like fine, that's normal, and there's nothing wrong with it. And I know what kind of the direction that I went into was that once I had started to see and like gain a better understanding of the world around me, that I wanted to do something with my origami, not just to make origamis and have them sit in my room, but I wanted to like make origamis for a cause.
And how old were you then?
I would say I didn't really start to do making origami for a cause until around like 4th grade.
Okay.
Just because that's like I consider 4th grade to be the time where I transitioned from not just like I mentioned earlier, from being someone who was behind on their learning because of like situations when I was a child, that like for transparency, like I just didn't have a fully developed brain. And now there's no issues, so if anyone asks, like there's 0 issues whatsoever. But
you wouldn't have gotten into the academy otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's like the time where I went from being behind to being not only just like on average with my class, but like starting to like really like click with the learning and connecting with the learning. And so I think like I would probably say it was around 4th grade where I became more in touch with like doing origami for a cause.
Okay. And where did that idea come from? Like, I would never have imagined that you could take something like this and use it to support a cause. As amazing as it is, that would never have occurred to me. It never did occur to me until I met you. So how did that happen for you?
So I'll first give like a little bit of background, and I think the background is necessary to understanding like my connection to the Philippines and why I ultimately decided to, to donate, like to make origami for a cause towards the Philippines. And so my mother obviously was an immigrant from the Philippines, grew up in the Philippines until her 20s, and then moved to the United States. And I would say like her upbringing was much different than mine. I have 1 sibling. My mother had 7. So just imagining, I could not fathom having at least another brother. I love my brother, but I just think like that's too much for me. So I think, and that just like large families in the Philippines are something that is normal just because of like cultural and religious, like what their belief systems are.
Mm-hmm.
And one person who particularly inspires me was my mother's dad. I call him Lolo, and he passed away in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't quite remember like that. I don't remember like crazy details about him, but I remember like the core details about him that stuck with me. And he is like my inspiration in life because he grew up in like a very low income area, like in poverty. He was only able to get an education because his older brother gave his education away for my grandfather. And I didn't know that. I actually didn't know that until after, when my mother told me. And I think like that sticks with me because that helps explain like the care and support he showed me like when I was a child, and wanting to, you know, be there for me. And even when I visited the Philippines for the very first time, when I was in like my little shoes, was that I could have lived in the Philippines for like almost 2 years when I was a kid, because he offered, like him, like my Lolo and my Lola were my mother's mother, offered to keep me. Just like that never happened, but thinking about the possibilities of what type of person I would be right now is like an interesting thought to think about. And like the experiences and like what I would remember about my Lolo is like I think about that sometimes. It's like one of those things that you think about, like one of those what if scenarios. And like at the end of the day, like my Lolo was my inspiration for wanting to be a better person and leaving the world a better person and make an impact on like people. Is like that's super important, because he not only impacted my family, he impacted like those around him, and he became a business owner. He was very, very successful in his life. He came from nothing to basically what I call having everything, because he like raised a super great family, and he was super happy with his life, and he thinks that, from what I remember, that like life is a beautiful thing. And that is something that I always remembered. And so I have lived with like that thought and that inspiration in my mind. And so in 2014, it was November of 2014, having so much family and connections over there, like I raised a bunch of money I made origami. And I sold them, basically. And I donated like, a bunch of the money to, my mother had connections in the Philippines, obviously, from being from the Philippines. And she reached out to individuals there and was able to get like all of this money from the United States to the Philippines, to a rural village in the Philippines, in order to buy boats for fishermen, where their villages relied on fishing for their industry, for their livelihoods. And being able to like have their boats was like, that literally saved their lives. Which I think, to me, it doesn't matter that I raised money, but the fact that like other people's lives were like basically like they were able to continue with their lives, to be able to support their families after like one of like the most devastating typhoons in known human history. I think that's like super, super cool to think about, and that they, like wherever they are now, they still have boats that like I was able to purchase for them, and they're like fishing for fish that people probably all across the Philippines could be eating. And that's super cool. Like I may have even eaten a fish that they fished. So, for all I know, I think like the spectrum of possibilities is super, super cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so you're making origami. How much are you selling them for?
I think when I sold those, I think that was probably around $4. I cannot say for sure, just because to me it mattered more that I was donating the money rather than how much, like, what the price tag said on it. And I think that, like, when I sold them at this, like, convention for young Americans in downtown Denver, people were drawn to the table because they saw some super cool origami. And then when they asked us about how we got into this and our cause, when I told them about that we were going to donate and for all of the causes, that, like, there was, like, something greater behind it. And I think that was, like, that's kind of what brought people to buy our product. And I think, like, the fact that I've already kind of, like, had this sort of buying experience has also influenced me, like, in my studies here. I'm an economics major, so I'm doing, like, an advanced version of what I did back then, and with, like, a specific focus that I've decided, like, I wanted to tailor it towards, like, international relations.
And so how many pieces did you make?
There were at least, like, 100 or so. I know they were not just stars. I make so many. I'm sure I've showed you the picture before of all, like, me as, like, a very small kid selling all the origamis, along with, like, the pictures of, like, the actual, like, villages with the boats. So I couldn't say for sure, but it was over 100.
Yeah, I mean, that's because you raised a lot of money. This isn't just a few $100s. We're talking thousands of dollars. I mean, that's a lot of money off of origami, as amazing as it is. And so you're 10, 11, 12 at that point in 2014?
Whenever 4th and 5th grade was.
Okay, so 4th and 5th grade, you're raising all this money and to buy these fishing boats. Did anyone ever say, "What are you doing, kid? Like, why don't you just go outside and play?" Did anybody ever say that to you? Did you ever think, why am I doing this? Or was your why just, even at that age, so strong and so clear that you couldn't stop?
I don't think I necessarily had a why back then, more so that I just enjoyed making origami and doing, like, to donate it. Or another instance of my origami was I would make origami and give it to elderly or to children's hospitals. And I think, like, I didn't have my why then, but I just knew that I enjoyed doing it. And that it was super cool when I would give, like, the elderly their origami and they would smile back. And, like, last winter during Christmas, I was able to go to, like, an elderly home with a couple of other cadets, and they were doing some caroling there. And when I gave them their origamis, like, they were genuinely super happy. Like, the smiles on their faces, kind of, like, it, like, heals your heart to think about it. It's, like, one of those, like, super happy, genuine smiles where, because, like, they're so old that sometimes, like the little things mean so much. Like 100 small pieces of paper, or, like, a couple full sheets of paper can make, like, that much of a difference on someone's life is super, super cool. And I was told later on that, like, it was the happiest that those, like, the elderly residents had been in a super long time. And so just demonstrating the power of origami is, like, not just origami, but, like, just doing something out of, like, the kindness of your heart. You might not think it makes a difference, but, like, it genuinely does for, like, a lot of people, especially if they are, like, elderly or sick children who are, like, not in the same position as, like, most adults or even children.
Yeah, that's amazing. It really is. And so this is something you continue to do, right? This wasn't just a one and done thing. You folded all that origami and you sold it, and you sent all the proceeds to the Philippines to buy boats. Did you ever get to see any of those boats? Did you ever get to go and see those fishermen? Or You just kind of knew in your mind that it was happening?
I've been to some of the areas that were affected, and I went even like a year before, like the typhoon came through and damaged like the whole village, and so I think I just felt like a general connection to like the work that I was doing and the fact that it did something for other people. What I like to think about is when I'm going and doing things for other people, I remember my why. I think it means more when people are actually able to experience it for themselves. And one thing that I've learned here at the academy is sometimes it's really hard to get cadets involved just because we're super busy here, and like it's harder for cadets to understand why they would go out and do something that isn't necessarily going to get them like bonus points or credit, just to do something that is just generally out of the kindness of your own heart. And so I think like in order to relay my message, I've relied a lot more on using like my own words rather than telling them what I've done. You know, why it's important, why you should care about doing like all of like just to care about someone else that you don't even know. You don't know their name. You might not even know what they look like, but just to do something for someone.
Yeah. So I mean, truly an altruistic act, and continuing to do that. You're very active in the volunteering at the squadron level and trying to get people involved. So you hit on something that I think is really important. A few weeks ago, I talked about one of the 6 traps of self-deception that we fall into, which is the futility farce, which is this idea that I'm just one person, I'm too busy, I'm not enough, I don't have the time, I don't have the money to make a difference and make an impact. And so I grew up in California on the beach, and I remember, walking the beach and picking up starfish, and I remember my mom telling me when I was a kid about the starfish story, right? And the girl, and in some versions it's a boy, and it's a young child who's running from starfish to starfish along the beach and picking them up and throwing them back into the ocean, and this old man coming along and saying, "What do you think you're doing? There's miles of beach, and there's thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of starfish. You're not, you can't help them all. You're not going to make a difference." And the little girl kind of listens respectfully and goes and picks up another starfish and throws it in the ocean and says, as she runs on to the next one, "I made a difference for that one." And, feeling that, sometimes we can get so overwhelmed by the problems, the enormity and the immensity of the problems of this world, that we can get paralyzed and not help the one that is right in front of us. So what would your message be to, kids young and old, adults young and old, just everybody out there? What would your message be in terms of just getting involved?
I would say first thing is that like when you're doing things for others, don't expect for you to change the world. In fact, you can't change the world. Like, you can't change the hearts and minds of every culture that's different from each other. Can't do that. But what you can do is like help others, and by that they can inspire other people, and that kind of creates like a tree where more and more people are being affected, and people who like are buying into like the whole idea of helping other people. And even if it's one singular person you're helping, and especially focusing on the people in front of you, but like everywhere, like if you're helping one singular person, they're better now than they were beforehand, and that you made a difference in their life. They might not remember your name, but if it was a significance difference, they're going to remember the time that this person came and they did something good for them. And I'll say this, I am almost certain that like the fishermen in the Philippines don't remember who I am. But I'm sure they remember the person who like that there was a person that got them boats. And now they have their livelihood. So understanding that there's always something that you can do, and it's not necessarily about having that recognition, more so about the impact you're making on at least just one person. That's what matters. And there's so many ways that you can accomplish doing this just by genuinely having a conversation. To go out of your way to be able to talk with someone is like one of the easiest ways to make an impact on people. I like to think of it like in squadron. I like to go to the freshman's room just to check in on them, see how they're doing, to make sure they're doing all right, and to see if I can get them anything. And so that's just one example of ways you can make a difference. Or for people, it's going to things that you don't necessarily have to go to, but other people have to go to. So for me, I also like to go to training when I'm not necessarily required to be there, and I'm the only person there who doesn't have to be there. And I think that kind of just stands out because it shows that you care. And when people see that you care, they might not necessarily understand your intentions, but they see that you're there, and then the more you do it, it sticks with them. And so there's so many ways you can make an impact, from your home, to your friends, when you're going to the grocery store. There's so many ways. The ways that you can impact someone in their lives is endless.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. One of the things that I started doing in my own life was, whenever I'm out in public and I see kids, I just smile at them and I wave. And sometimes they smile and wave back at me. And, just the world can be a scary place for kids sometimes, right? And there can be a lot of pressure on parents to oh, my kids have got to be quiet and they've got to be well behaved. And so I always also try and encourage parents who might be, frustrated or flustered or tired or whatever it is. If you want to make it your life's mission to just open the door for people or to say hi to somebody, we never know the impact that a kind word can have on somebody. We have no idea the sort of impact that some small act can have. And yet, whatever it is, I always try and acknowledge service members when I'm out in public. I go up and I say thanks for your service, especially when I see the older generation and they're wearing their hats, and I'm both of my grandfathers were, my maternal grandfather, David Bacon, was a World War II vet, and my paternal grandfather lied about his age so that he could sign up and go to Korea, and he was a Korean War vet. And when I see people in uniform, I think of my two grandfathers, and without knowing anything else about those service members, it is enough for me to know that they're willing to put on the uniform, that you're willing to put on the uniform, that you're willing to make those sacrifices to serve our country, to defend our Constitution, and that's enough for me to thank them. I don't need to know anything else about them to know that because they made that choice and because that they were raised in a way that they had the support of so many people behind them to get them to that point, that that's enough. And so I honor them, I respect them. To all of you vets and to everyone who is serving, I thank you for your service to our nation, even when it's a thankless job. And that includes you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So we've talked about a lot today, and you've given me so much to think about. I've known you for a couple of years, and even as we're talking about doing this, and I was learning more about you, and you're sharing more of your story, even in this conversation, I've learned more about you, and I appreciate your willingness to come on to the podcast and share the story with the world. But there are people who are tuning in to hear stories like yours, and I hope that this reaches, people who are your age, who maybe might not tune in, but who are like, oh, what's this young person got to say? So if you had 2 minutes to tell the world one thing that could make a difference, what would it be?
Yeah, I think first thing is like going along with this, that it's okay to be scared, to not know how to help someone. But, you know, taking that energy and doing something with it. It's okay for me to be scared to share my story with others, because, like, you don't know what people are going to think, but understanding that someone is going to be out there listening is super important. And so what I'll say to that, if, like, there's one thing that you take away from, is that you can learn so much by listening to people, and you are worth learning from. That you have an experience and an insight that you can provide that can help make someone better. And the only way we get better is, in fact, by learning from other people. And so you're worth learning from, and by learning from other people, you can gain, like, a better insight and appreciation for the world. And, you know, everyone's opinions are valid, and everyone is worth something, and they're meaningful to someone. And so taking those experiences and then using that as, like, a global view to be able to just, like, have an outlook on life is super important. Because if you aren't learning from other people, if you're just using your own opinions, then you're not really growing. The growth mindset comes from learning people. So I'm looking at the screen. I don't know you right now, but I'm telling you, like, you're worth learning from. And I want you to go and have a conversation with someone. And when they ask you, like, when you get into conversation, and then they ask you what you're doing, you can be like, I'm doing this. And then when they ask, why would you do that? Because, like, regardless of what it is, you can tell them why. And they're learning something from you. And, like, it's like an uncommon way to think of something. And, like, the difference that changes people when you really want to learn from someone is that it's uncommon to learn from people and actively seek out their opinion. And there's a lot to learn from a lot of people. Like, the endless, like, the opportunities are endless.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings, you know, me back around to what I talked about a couple weeks ago, which is, you know, Sun Tzu's most important principle, to know yourself, to listen to that inner voice, right? To listen to your heart, and to know others, to understand other people. That by doing so, we become unbreakable. As a society, as individuals, defeat will not devastate us, hardship will not break us. When we understand ourselves and each other, that is the key to victory. And, you know, it brings me back, you mentioned, you know, fear, and not letting fear dissuade you. It brings me back to something that Ambrose Redmoon had said, which is, courage is not the absence of fear, but the determination that there is something more important than our fear, which goes back to your why. When we have that sense of what our why is, we're willing to push past the fear. And all of the growth and all of the miracles that can happen in our lives are on the other side of our fear, which is something that Will Smith had said. And I firmly believe that. And so I appreciate you having the courage to come on here and to share your story with us. And I feel like it's a privilege. It's a privilege for me to be your teacher, and to share your story. I remember it was just a couple of weeks ago that you kind of mentioned in passing, right, when we're sitting downstairs and we're just talking, and you mentioned how you wanted to get your message out more. And I said, well, why don't you come on the podcast? And here we are. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for coming on, and I appreciate you, and Nihal Jila. Don't forget it. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope that you have learned something from this. I hope that you are inspired to go out and start doing something to help somebody else. Wherever you are in your life, whatever stage of life you are in, wherever you find yourself, there are needs. The world is hurting in so many ways right now. There are endless opportunities to get involved and to make a difference in people's lives. And so always remember, the power to win resides within. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening, everybody. If you found this podcast impactful, please like and subscribe, and join us for new episodes every Warrior Wednesday. For more information, tools, and resources to help you in your daily battles, for questions or to work with me, shoot me an email at artofwarforlife@gmail.com. Most important, always remember, the power to win resides within. There is always a way.